Welcome, everyone. Welcome to session 2. My name is Lila Martins. I'm originally from Brazil, and I'm currently living in Bonn, the headquarters of the UNFCCC. So it's a great pleasure to be here and joining these two worlds of mine. I'm also part of the Entertainment and Culture Pavilion, and it's great to see this partnership taking place to also make Culture, Heritage, and Arts Thematic Day a success. So this part of the day is going to shift the focus from policy design to infrastructure, relationships, and capacities that make culture-based climate action possible at scale. I'm really excited that we're here to explore how systems and collaboration models, funding ecosystems, and cross-sector partnerships can help us move from isolated initiatives to interlinked systems of practice. Culture has always been a connective force. And the question now is, how do we build the institutional, financial, and knowledge infrastructures that allow our cultural actors to contribute to climate solutions with greater reach and coherence? So we will explore what it takes to strengthen the connective tissues between these organizations, sectors, and communities so that the capacities grow collectively rather than in silos. And with that, it is my great pleasure to introduce our first speaker. So up first, we have Alexa Halpern. Please join us on stage. A big round of applause. Alexa works with the UNFCCC Secretariat on capacity building and stakeholder engagement, supporting countries and institutions in strengthening climate action through knowledge, learning, and collaboration. Her work focuses on enabling inclusive and effective capacity building processes across the regions. Up next, we have a Brazilian with us, Thiago Jesus, please, on stage. Thiago is a producer, researcher, and program lead with People's Palace Projects and a core member of the We Make Tomorrow campaign. He focuses on arts-driven climate action, indigenous knowledge collaboration, and community-based storytelling with partners across the Amazon and global creative networks. Next, we have Simon Musasavi, is the co-chair. Well, a big round of applause for him first. I specifically asked for the pronunciation of his name, so apologies. I'll ask him to redo it for me. Is the co-chair for Africa at the Climate Heritage Network and a practitioner in cultural heritage resilience. He works at the intersection of heritage, community empowerment, and climate adaptation, supporting African cultural institutions and network to build climate-responsive capacity practice. Welcome everybody on stage. Thank you so much for joining us. Check, check. All right, fantastic. Well, before we get into the actual questions, it would be wonderful if you can introduce yourself for a bit. Who are you? What are you working on? And we can start with you right next to me. And please pronounce your name once again.
This is a Ugandan culture to hit on the mic, always to make sure it's working. My name is Simon Musasize. I work for the Cross Cultural Foundation of Uganda. It's a non-government organization that works on the issues of promoting and safeguarding our culture. So we are a member organization of the Climate Heritage Network, where we are privileged to be the hosts of the Climate Heritage Network for the Africa and Arab region. And the Secretariat is housed at our offices. I'm happy to be here on this panel. Thank you so much.
Shall I go next? Yes. So hello, everyone. So my name is Thiago Jesus. I am Brazilian, as I was introduced. I am a creative producer. I'm a researcher. I'm an activist. I work at an arts organization, an arts research center focused on climate justice called People's Palace Projects. And we are based at Queen Mary University of London. I've also worked at Julie's Bicycle, which is a UK non-profit that works mobilizing the creative and cultural sector to engage on nature, climate, and biodiversity crisis in the UK. And I've been part of this global mobilization for placing culture at the heart of climate action for maybe 4 or 5 years. Yes, so I've been to 5 COPs before. Since COP 26 in Glasgow, I've been working with the team, with so many of you who are in the room, trying to, build this momentum as a civil society to influence the policymakers and the negotiators to really understand and recognize and integrate culture as a fundamental piece of climate action. Thank you.
Hello, hi. So my name is Alexa Halperin. I work for UNFCCC, and just picking up what Thiago said, so also the UN Climate Change Secretariat is tapping into the power of culture and its importance, certainly in relation to climate action. I work for the Entertainment and Culture Alliance, ECA, under UN Climate Change, and I started like about half a year ago, so I can tell you it's fascinating to see what's happening out there in the world, and we're very happy to support it in a useful way under UN Climate Change.
Fantastic. Well, welcome on our stage, and we have a great conversation. And I would really suggest for the audience to take note, as we're going to dive into a workshop right after, where you will all have the opportunity to also ask questions and engage with them. So keep an eye open on some of the great things they're going to share. Simon, I'd love to start with you first as well, because we'd love to know, we're doing this move from policy, which we were talking about before, and it would be wonderful to get your perspective on how can we show the real impact of culture on climate action in ways that policymakers value and they understand exactly what Thiago was also starting to mention.
All right, thank you so much. I apologize that I had another side event, but I was able to catch the tail end of the last session, and the panelists there did really a good job in terms of highlighting some of the things that I was going to mention today, but I will be able to re-emphasize them. I think, as said in the last session, I think one of the things that we need to prioritize is the issue of policy frameworks. And indeed, it has been highlighted that we need to integrate culture both at international and national policy frameworks in the NAPs, in the NDCs, but also at the local level, at policy level, at the local level. Indeed, as you are aware, there have been some gains with the global goal on adaptation, where culture is one of those that is being prioritized as one of the indicators. And indeed, as the discussions are going on, of course, we are worried that culture may be struggling to find its space in that platform. But we are optimistic that the indicators will include culture, that the 8 indicators will not be ignored, they will be prioritized. So that is one of them. And the other one is, again, to re-emphasize the issue of the global networks and alliances. I must say that we need to build the capacity of coalitions, like the one I belong to, which is the Climate Heritage Network. It's a coalition of like-minded people in the organizations, institutions that are looking at the intersection between climate change and culture. Of course, we have other coalitions like ICOM. ICOM Sustain, our vice president is here. We have IFARA. So we need to build the capacities of these coalitions where people are looking at the issue of prioritizing culture in climate action. And indeed, as you've seen, one of the things that we are perhaps beginning to celebrate is the past, and some of the initiatives that are highlighted in this have been coming from these coalitions. I don't need to re-emphasize them, you're aware. So I think we just need to build on that to be able to make more gains for culture. The other one is on cross-sectorial collaborations. I think we need formal institutional mechanisms for multi-stakeholder planning and coordination across culture, environment, and science sectors. This is really crucial in terms of generating holistic insights and evidence-based policy making. Yeah, I don't know if this is the time. Okay. Yeah, of course, additionally, of course, this question was wide in terms of looking at the tools, but I was looking at the UNESCO Culture 2030 indicators. I think they help countries in terms of measuring the contribution of culture in development. And indeed, I think we need to provide a standardized way. They provide a standard way in terms of looking at the impact of the contribution of culture in climate action and sustainable development. Still on the past, I just wanted to highlight I don't know if my colleague was able to bring it out, but I'm really proud for past 3, which is looking at capacity building for adapting cultural practices and heritage sites. And indeed, we have what we are calling the Heritage Adapts, the 3,000 heritage sites by 2030. I think to achieve this, the campaign will inspire advocates for at least 3,000 heritage sites that are able to integrate culture and look at the issue of culture in development. So we need to support them to fulfill their pledge by 2030. This campaign aims to solve the problem of removing existing barriers to scaling culture-based climate action, filling the gaps in tools and training, including groundbreaking new monitoring, evaluation, and learning toolkit for heritage. Expanding access to climate data, promoting risk-informed decision-making in heritage management, and improving recognition of cultural heritage in climate adaptation policy and finance. Of course, there are other tools that we look at, like the life cycle assessment, where we can look at how built heritage is contributing in terms of climate mitigation and adaptation, and all the other GIS tools that we can think about. I think the other one is also trying to document successful stories. We need to do that. And co-create examples of culture-based climate action. Thank you so much.
Thiago, over to you as well. So we heard some suggestions on different processes, whether it's indicators, alliance, coalitions, cross-sector mechanisms. What are the specific tools that you have seen in your work that are supporting and bringing culture into this climate space? And what successes have you had?
Okay. So what I'm going to do is start by saying that I think that culture is climate action. You know, when we are still building the communication pathways for policymakers to recognize this. And what I'm feeling very much at this COP, very strongly, like Vinicius said in his opening speech, is that something that I haven't seen in previous ones is that we are now really strengthening the pathways together with a level of coordination, with a level of collaboration that we haven't managed to achieve before. And we as a sector, we are now becoming much more strategic, I think, in how we communicate this. We are developing shared language that resonates with climate, with planning, with finance ministries. So for instance, the term culture-based climate solutions, you know, that positions culture as a field of climate action. And I think this is crucial because we are talking about the COP of implementation, and for implementation to work, I think Carlos said that as well, it has to be place-based, it has to be people-centered, it has to be sector-specific, it has to be culturally relevant, and interlinking scientific knowledge with traditional knowledge, different diverse knowledge systems, knowledge, cultural expressions, practices from traditional communities. This is exactly what culture and cultural actors do. And we need to continue building on the evidence base for that. And I think that the interlinks between culture and climate they're very evident for us, they're very obvious for us working in the sector, but they are not to the policymakers who are sitting on the next room trying to. So these are the people that we need to influence. And as much as there is existing infrastructures and tools and investments, most of them are concentrated in the global north. Again, like Vinicius said in his speech, which limits the understanding of what is the full range of culture's contribution, of culture's responses from the global majority. And I think to fix that, we need to invest in properly coordinated data collection, mixed methods research, and in participatory evaluation approaches and indicators that allow communities to define themselves what culture effectiveness looks like. And part of the challenge of the question is that the cultural impacts, it's relational, it's a long term, and it's very difficult for us to speak to the existing metrics of climate. And we need evidence that speaks to where culture is already working but not yet counted. So I listed some priority areas here that I thought could be interesting. I think quantifying the economic and non-economic losses of climate impacts on cultural, creative industries and heritage sector, especially on living heritage and indigenous and Afro-descendant cultural practices, which are critical repositories of knowledge, of solutions to fight and to adapt to climate change. Another one, tracking emissions, waste, environmental footprint across the creative industry, so we can understand the full scope of our impact and assess the mitigation and adaptation potential and our responsibilities in that space. Also, mapping sector initiatives, regenerative cultural practices worldwide to shine light into culture-based solutions that already exist, that have existed for hundreds and thousands of years, and some of them that are emerging, and we're trying to do that with the culture map that We Make Tomorrow that Daniel and the Convergence is doing. So this is really important as like this repository of knowledge, and also expanding evidence on the effectiveness of arts, of storytelling, of cultural participation in shifting attitudes, in influencing decision, and in supporting long-term behavior change. So I think these are 4 areas that I think we need to pay attention more when we think about the tools and investments and communications. And I think that building these evidence in the collective, collaborative way, we can demonstrate that culture is not a peripheral actor to climate, but a protagonist. It needs to be a protagonist in climate action and justice.
I love that. Thank you so much. Well, it really stands out to me the point you said, we need to make it clear what it is that we're doing, and that's why I wanted to pass it over to Alexa. If you could briefly introduce to us the concept of the accelerator city model and what it is trying to solve, and how does it really make the economical and non-economical visible, as Thiago was just referring to.
Yeah, thank you very much for this, Leila. And I would like to briefly talk about ECA first. So entertainment culture for climate action has been started to become active about 2 years ago. And I know many in the audience are very versed in this because they were the ones driving it in the first place. But over the last decade, climate action has accelerated across governments and cities, but it seemed like culture remained an underused lever. And yet culture, film, museums, music, all these different sectors, large-scale events like festivals, they profoundly shape how people think about climate change. So basically there is two streams of work or thinkings that we are taking up. One is decarbonizing creative industry sectors, and the other is using the power to mobilize climate action to bring this up to a higher level. So ECHA was created exactly for that. It's bringing together policymakers and scientists to drive low-carbon choices and embed climate action in everyday life. And in this regard, we also launched the pilot of the Accelerator City, where the city of Liverpool became the inaugural city for it. This is a public-private partnership which was developed by work of Act 1.5, who looked into, that's a collaborative platform, who looked into how to decarbonize large musical events, but also how to collaborate with cities and see what it is that they need from cities to do that. And that was a major project, about 1 year. In essence, a science-anchored public-private partnership, which just ended, and I'm happy to talk about it a little bit more later. But I would also like to use the opportunity that we decided to launch a call soon for other cities to be able to apply to become the next Accelerator City, and details of that will be published on our website early next year.
Ooh, fantastic. So stay tuned as well. I was lucky enough to be at the launch and see the enthusiasm of also the city in sharing everything that they've done. So we'll come back to the city. But maybe coming back to Simon here, I love that you were saying about cross-sector collaboration, and that's a big part of my work as well. So how do you think we can mobilize cross-sector collaboration between cities, the creative industries, heritage institutions, funders, very key, to actually accelerate climate action beyond the culture field itself?
Yeah, thank you so much for that really important question. I think one of the things that I was reflecting on is that we need to establish a framework of a shared vision and governance for cities to integrate culture in their core planning. When I was in Barcelona, I think for the Mondiacat, one of the things that really captured my attention was when I was reading the magazine, I saw the position of night, I've forgotten the exact title, but there was a night commissioner who is looking at all night activities and how culture of the Catalonia people is integrated in the activities of this city. So I think it will take city authorities and the locals in terms of seeing how do they want to see culture playing a big role in their development models. The other one is we can leverage the culture sector's unique strengths. How do we make physical spaces that culture provides, the heritage sites and so on, as learning spaces? And indeed, in my country, we have demonstrated this using the Withstanding Change project that has been supported by British Council. We restored a heritage property that speaks a lot about our background, especially in the colonial and post-colonial period. And this property has been really affected by the impact of climate change. So it's now a public museum open to the public for people to come and learn. And we are now getting big groups of students, young people who are coming to use this space to learn, but also ask themselves about what is it about our culture that we can carry forward, but also think how our communities use to adapt to climate change. Of course, there are other intangible elements of culture that we can really use to be able to create awareness about the issue of climate change and heritage and the role that heritage can play. Things like storytelling. I think the other day we had, I think it was the people who were using film and so on, and I was really amazed. So we need to use all elements of our culture to be able to create awareness, but also see how our communities can actually be, because they know how they used to adapt to climate change. So we need to carry these stories forward in all the platforms that we have. Thank you so much.
Tiago, I took note on what you said here about place-based people and making sure people are connected. I'd love to get your perspectives, and we talk about cities as a central for cross-sector collaboration, but I'd love to learn from your experience, how have you seen this cross-sector collaboration maybe happen in cities or in other dimensions of what maybe place-based means for you? How do we bring all these people together?
I will answer this sharing a little bit about my experience of building very much in the spirit of the mutirão, if that's okay, because I think it's an interesting story of collaboration, which is actually not in a city, but it's in an indigenous village in the Xingu. So I work with an indigenous community in the upper region of the Xingu indigenous territory, the Wauja people, who have been living in that land for thousands and thousands of years, and they have a sacred cave, which is where they have learned their relationship with nature. Really, it's where since you're young, you would travel. You will do this traveling of days to get to this cave where there are petroglyphs for thousands of years there, where the leaders, the elders, would tell the stories to the kids on how to become a leader, how to relate to nature, the relationship with spirituality, with the morals, with the relationship with the environment. And that cave sits outside of the territory. And there was a moment, a very complicated political moment here in Brazil just before the Bolsonaro election, where the tension on that region was really high. And someone went to the cave and, we don't know who, but someone went and hacked away, destroyed all of the petroglyphs of the cave. Yes, they destroyed like hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of years, the repository of knowledge that is essential and integral to the living heritage of that community. And that was a clear attempt to remove the sacredness of that place so that land could be expropriated. It could become a soy farm. It could become, so indigenous people wouldn't have the right to occupy that land. And you're talking about collaboration. That's why I'm talking about this, because that was a moment where we, facing a moment of crisis, we have been working with those communities for many years, and we created a cross-cultural mobilization where we brought in anthropologists, technologists, digital artisans, and a group of people that were there together to think about what can the culture and the arts and what we can do, how can we collaborate. And we developed a mutirão, which is, I don't know, I don't need to explain do I need to explain what mutirão is to anyone here? I think we are all well versed on what it is. But we created a mutirão where everyone brought in what they could, the expertise that they had, the fundings that they have, the resources that they had, to try to solve an issue that we didn't know how we would get to, but the intention was there. And it was place-based, people-centered, culturally appropriate, responsive, and all of that. And what we did was the community started going to different villages and start getting the recordings, the elders, to tell the stories of those petroglyphs, the stories, the myths that were there that were not told before, or that they held, only oral stories. So that they started documenting these, and they started redrawing the petroglyphs from memory while they were telling those stories. And then with the technologists, with this foundation called Factum that came, they work with the preservation of cultural heritage, digital preservation of cultural heritage. They scanned the destroyed cave and they started mapping the collective memory, the drawings, the stories with the pieces that were missing there. And then with universities, we started getting like, who are the people who have been there, who have photographed? Then we went to IFAN, the Heritage Foundation of Brazil. And then we started collating those pieces, and in the end, there was enough content to recreate that map. And then someone else came and said, we can actually construct a replica of the cave. And then we built a replica, a real-size replica of the cave that was 8 meters by 4 by 4, weighing 2 tons. A real-size replica. And then we said, how do we get there to take this cave back? Then COVID happened. So we couldn't take that cave because the cave was in Madrid. And then VR developers came into the story. And then we were like, okay, if they can get to the cave during this moment of crisis, we don't know what's going to be lost. What is the cultural loss for this community? So they started online developing, with support from other funders, they started developing a VR technology so that the community there could feel the kids from the schools that didn't have access anymore to go to the cave. They could go into the schools with the VR, feel that they are entering the cave, and they would click on the petroglyph and there would be a video of the elders telling what the stories of the petroglyphs were. And we knew that was it's a beautiful story. And that was a very momentary solution, because we knew that the main aim was to take the cave back. And then 4 years later, after everything was okay, we got a grant from a partner that works in IT, because we sold the idea of like we needed funding to take the cave back. And then I said to this organization that like, this cave is the hard drive, is a real hard drive of the memory, of the collective memory of the community. And then they were funders of hard drives. I said, yes, it is true, let's take it. And then we took the cave back to the village. So it's just like, and now they have a museum. And then we invited architects to work with the collective material, because we needed to create a place for that cave to last, to that replica to last. So they developed a new way of building a traditional house with materials that were collected in the village using soil, the bricks that were there, but that would keep that heritage site, the replica, preserved for longer. So like, when you think about this is an example of what I think cross-collaboration is. And it's hard, I think, to measure what the impact of that is, but I think it's an act of faith in a way, because we are not measuring, we are not saying, it's about allowing the community to have access to the stories that belong to them, that form who they are, that are essential to their identity, to what they do. And we will see what's going to happen. And it's not for myself to say or to evaluate or to measure. It's not something that we'll know in 5, 10 years. But what I know is that in the history of that community, there's a history of resistance. There's a history of collaboration. There is a history of people coming together to solve an issue that is basically cultural. It's arts, it's heritage, it's everything that we are talking about in a beautiful, I think, model. I hope that somehow answers your questions again.
That definitely answers my question, because it was all about this cross-sector collaboration, right? You have the IT here and you have everybody else. And the idea of talking about the cave as a hard drive, phenomenal. We also need to learn how we can connect our cultural words with the words of those that we're trying to influence.
That's what we have to do here.
Exactly.
You know?
Learn. Amazing. Talking about place-based, Alexa, I'd also love to understand why Liverpool? What makes this pilot so important for broader capacity building as well?
I'm so inspired by what Thiago said that actually I would like to pick up on part of it in a moment. Yeah. But let me answer your question first. So Liverpool became was basically selected because of the ambition that was there already, creativity, and a quite strong sector in creative industries, which means film and TV and music events. So they were very advanced, and that's why we chose them, because the idea of this Accelerated City initiative is to function as a test bed for new ideas. So decarbonization of festivals and large-scale events is the goal, but it's to try out and pilot new approaches. And this is where the city comes into play, because it's a co-creative effort. So you have the creative industry on one side, and you have the city that wants to be this enabling environment. So it's to see, like, what are the barriers that industries face? What is it that they need from cities in terms of, there's so many aspects: transport, energy supply, waste, like bringing citizens into the scene. So to co-create these activities with the citizens, and clearly cities are the closest to their citizens. So that's what Liverpool did very well, and they developed several test beds. And as we said, and we're talking about measuring, so another important aspect is that it has to be data-backed at one point. And this is also what then makes policymakers become more interested in it, besides just the joy and pleasure or beauty that culture brings to us. So there are efforts to look into how to measure the success of these activities in terms of decarbonization. It's clearly easier because there you get to the quantitative parts of it. But obviously, talking about culture, we cannot be strangled by quantitative expectations. So the qualitative way of assessing it is something that you will all know is being discussed a lot, also at this COP, surely to be evolved. And yeah, I think it's possible. Actually, it reminds me, and may I bring in ECHA as another pillar. Right now it's pillars, but this already looks a bit like silos, so we want to break that part at one point in time. But this film and TV pillar that we have, supported by a very strong steering committee, is looking a lot into storytelling. And the storytelling part brings you to also look how the stories that are told, be it through film and TV, do have an impact on people, on society, on how they perceive climate change in the first place, and ideas for climate action. So it's also looking into another topic which we see being discussed lately a lot, disinformation or misinformation about climate change. So there's so much richness in culture, where you see how it's a cross-cutting lever for climate action. And this is where, again, ECHA is very happy to tap into as well. I think I lost my point. Was this the answer?
Yes, of course. You also mentioned you wanted to say something about Thiago. Do you want to?
Yeah, well, in a way, it was what I now did, because I didn't really go into the details how strong and supportive Liverpool was. So reflecting about the power in broad terms and how to engage basically the living rooms. So going away from the boardrooms where we have our, well, you know, the human brain has two hemispheres, the right one, the left one, and we were communicating, and we are saying also in the climate change process a lot to the left brain, which is very data, science-based, data-oriented, but you feel it didn't reach, there's a limit to how you reach out to people, whereas the right brain, which works with emotions, is much more powerful. And you need to stop me, because I could now talk for hours, because we had some very, very nice events, also under ECHA, which I'm very glad that we were able to organize or co-host, where you felt the power of music or the power of films that tell the stories that are discussed in the Blue Zone. They are discussed in the meeting rooms, but the way it's transported through music, a film, is so effective that that's what I felt. You cannot underestimate the value of it, and this is why I'm so happy to be on this panel with so many people knowing and working exactly in that field of culture. Thank you.
Brilliant. Well, we're going to jump into a short workshop in a minute, and to start helping our community here take the next steps, I'd love to hear from you all about, okay, if we imagine a future and the present where cultural institutions are part of climate decision making, what are the first steps that we need to take today? And you can all bring from these examples that you started, what can we actually do to embed the cultural institutions into the climate decision making today and tomorrow? Simon, happy to start with you.
Okay, thank you so much. I'll just mention two. One is on policy. Again, I'm just re-emphasizing policy and planning integration, which has been referred to in the first session, which I have also referred to. We need a policy framework that really integrates culture in climate action. I want to re-emphasize that. But above all is the cross-sectorial coordination. One of the things that we were wondering with my colleagues for the first time I was in the negotiation room for the very first time. I've attended COP, I think this is the second time. I was wondering where are the ministers of culture? Of course, there were 8 indicators really focused on culture, and we left other people to be the one discussing and so on. So I don't know, I'm not an expert on how the UN works, but I think I saw that as a really big gap, that we had no people who are really negotiating on our behalf. Last, I think, is dedicated funding. I think we need to have a special, maybe culture fund that is really there to look at issues of culture, and especially prioritizing funding for our young people. I think they are really the future for the entire world, and they have really good ideas and innovations, but they really have limited access to funding. Thank you so much.
That's wonderful. So we have a policy framework to integrate culture and climate, cross-sector collaboration, especially in negotiations, and then we have dedicated funding for culture and climate. Thiago, what's on your side?
Some of these are on my list already.
That's wonderful.
But I will say it again, because I think we need to say it again and again and again and again. But I think that I think we need to increase the attention of the cultural dimensions of climate change in these spaces, across all public policies, all public programs, funding, dialogue mechanisms, and that is from local to regional to national to international level. We really need to socialize what we are doing here. And that means both safeguarding culture and cultural expressions from the impacts of climate change, but also, as we said in the beginning, building the evidence and the political space that it's what Brazil is doing really well for culture and climate solutions. So I think my number one point would be our governments need to integrate culture into our national climate action instruments. So that is the NDCs, the NAPs. We need explicit language on culture on that. And Carlos said that once we have the language, things flow. You know, and we need that. So we need that on the NDCs, we need that on our NAPs, on our sustainable development and biodiversity strategies. Because when culture is in these documents, it enters the structure, the governance structure. Point 2, ministers of culture must be involved in climate policy process as a standard practice. And culture, they need to see it on the table when we are making decisions on climate. And this requires as well, and then there's a step ahead before, which is a real capacity building for cultural policymakers to understand climate governance, and for environmental and foreign affairs ministries to understand what culture-based solutions are. So it's like a dual game of capacity building that we need to create. Third one, cultural policy must embed climate action, which is something that is not happening to. You know, just as we are asking climate policy to recognize culture. We need culture policy to have climate targets in its programs, in its frameworks, in its fundings as well. So ministries of culture should align their programs with the national commitments of their countries under the Paris Agreement. And another thing, it's giving mandate to arts councils, to the arts agencies, whatever we have in our structures, in our governance, for them to integrate climate action into their everyday practice, into their mandate, its legal mandate, because this creates the institutional backbone for a long-term engagement of culture in climate. And finally, I think we must recognize and scale up culture-based climate action that are already happening. I said that in the beginning, but it's already happening everywhere in the world. Civil society, community organizations, indigenous cultural leaders, they are carrying the work, they are doing it. And for that we need, to one point of Simon, dedicated funding streams. We need strengthening climate expertise and leadership across the cultural sector, developing regulatory frameworks to measure environmental footprints and to act on that, supporting adaptation of heritage sites and properties, resourcing grassroots community-led initiatives, especially those led by indigenous and traditional communities. And I do think that if we take these steps together, cultural institutions will be part of the climate governance, the climate architecture governance, supporting a transition that is not only technical, but it's also culturally grounded.
Well, I'd love to close with you, Alexa, because I think a lot of the points that they have started raising here, we've seen glimpses of them already in the Liverpool pilot. It'd be wonderful to hear from you. How have these collaboration models actually been put in place? What can we learn from them? And is any of the points around funding, collaboration, making sure culture and climate are working in as one being seen already in Liverpool?
Certainly there are. It's the understanding of cities being conveners and not regulators. And I think with this idea, you will see support for, be it the festivals and events that I've been mentioning before, but also the work of museums that has been earlier mentioned by Vinicius as well. So seeing the city as a convener to respond and support and co-create this enabling environment that you're mentioning, Tiago, to see how to bring all these aspects into the game, and depending on in which region you are, there's different needs and expectations. So Liverpool is a city example of the global north, but obviously cities in other areas have other needs, and this enabling environment, this has to come from the bottom up, where cities know what the needs are. By the way, we also launched, the Film and TV Steering Committee also launched a global survey on climate action, which is mostly addressing or mainly addressing film producing countries and the global south, to explore what their experiences with climate narratives, how they take it into account in their filmmaking, what's needed or what they would need to do more about it. And the interesting part when this survey was developed was, again, something that I'm touching upon what you said. Culture, we always talk about culture, but there's so many different aspects to it that it's good to be, once we enter into a conversation, to make sure that we're talking about the same thing, be it finding the right language. So in that survey, we spoke about climate change. And then I learned, actually, that in some languages, climate change as an expression doesn't mean anything. So actually, if you want to ask this question, you rather ask, what's your experience with droughts or floods or rising sea level rise, or communities being affected? And then immediately people respond, oh yes, this is what we have, that's what we're facing, that's what we want to address. So these are like the different, I mean, you know, you're nodding, these are experiences that you make, but it's interesting to make yourself aware of that again and again. So now there's an important role in local level action on culture and climate action. We, from a UN perspective, ECHA, we need to always take the global perspective, so we don't engage directly with city level or subnational level activities, except for, like Accelerator City now does, it's to create a platform to, what's the word now? but basically to leverage, to promote this and then be able to upscale or show others examples so they can connect with these cities and then they can upscale what's learned, the experience, they will share experiences, and this is where we take interest in to bring this forward.
Well, that's wonderful, and I'm up here, so I'm taking a bunch of notes, because what we're going to do now is we're going to go into a quick breakout, and I will part the sea here, and I will have one group on this end, so you all can try to form a little circle, and you also on this end, and we'll try to have a discussion then on what are the solutions, and let me not drop the water, what are the solutions that you all are working on and that you can best share and collaborate as a community. So we'll have around 15 to 20 minutes, and then maybe we'll give a couple, a word to one or two to share what you've learned, okay? So maybe Thiago and Simon, you can come over here. Alexa, we'll have you over there, as we have some of our colleagues over there as well that can share with us. So quick circle, and I'll bring you all back in around 15 to 20 minutes. Thank you.
Smart move.